right. Hello, everyone.
All right.
It's
Hello, everyone.
oh my God.
Hello,
Hold on.
everyone.
I need to
All right.
pause
Hello.
Twitch because I'm hearing myself twice. Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Earthcast. Which episode is it? Is it the fourth? I believe.
It is indeed episode 4.
So, welcome to this fourth episode of Earthcast. The first one that I am actually part of, and I am actually hosting it. So this is a big It's a big responsibility. Um, so today the topic is one that we have been having on hold for a long time, and now it is coming here, and that is Conlangs. And for this matter, I am surrounded by two conlangers, which are Owen and Ian, uh, also known as Asindavia. Um, and also, I have. So, us three have created a language of our own for Earth, for our countries on Earth. In the case of Owen, Owen adopted Pennsylvania some time ago and has done an incredible job, massive, with Pennsylvania, a country that is really old on Earth, and Owen is giving it new life, and part of it has been creating a whole language for it in that record time. And Ian has also created an amazing language for the same country of his name, Zendavia, which is one of the most complex yet impressive languages I have seen Conlang here. Uh, well, I have also created a language for a while now, and that is Kukish, the Kukish language, for my main country, which is New Leganese. Um, so today we're going to tonight, better said, we're going to discuss what it is to create languages. How do you create them? And give advice for people that are now on tap and also that might be in the future because this is gonna be recorded and many people can watch this afterwards. Advice for them to create languages of their own too. This is an enormous mission that we're taking here, but I believe we're going to make an incredible job. So, first question I am making to these amazing people I have with me. Why did you create your Conlangs? What were the reasons of it?
Um, um, Ian, is it okay if I go first?
That's fine by me.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Owen. It's lovely to meet you all here. This is the first Earthcast that I'm part of formally. So it's really just a pleasure to be on this platform and to share some of the experiences that I've had, as well as the knowledge I've accumulated through the process of creating conlangs. So just as Sami asked, what were the reasons for creating Conlangs? So I think I want to give a brief history of the process that I went through in order to provide some greater insight into where I started and what was the reason. So the first Conlang I attempted to create was Owen, which was the language that was spoken by the people in the Owen Isles. That language was based on let me not tell you what it was based on because we'll be doing that under the third part of today's show. But I started by creating Owen. And at the time, I didn't know a lot about languages. And I had a very vague sense of the kind of aesthetic that I wanted to create. Because I knew that I wanted the Owen Isles to be a tropical island country. And one of the cultures that I'd found to be interesting, or groups of cultures that I found to be interesting rather, was Polynesian cultures. And I wanted to emulate that. However, I did find that process quite difficult, and I ended up co-opting the vocabulary and so on of Maori to the point that I just abandoned creating Owen as a conlang and instead use an oral language. And that brings me to, in part, the first element of creating the first reason rather, for me for creating a conlang, and that is aesthetic. One of the things I tried to do with the Owen Isles, which I ended up continuing with the other conlangs that I created that I'll get into in a moment, was that I wanted to create a certain aesthetic behind how my country functioned. I wanted to immerse myself as well as immerse people who were engaging with the Owen Isles through role playing and world building in I wanted to make it feel more lived in, more almost real, and to provide a sense of like the look and the vibe of um the kind of country I wanted to create. And for that reason, aesthetic is one of the key reasons that I had when I wanted to create a conlang. Then I created Iboma, which is a country in Novaris that is predominantly occupied by elves. And I also created a language for that. And that furthered sort of how I wanted to explore the idea of using a language for um, aesthetic reasons. But Pennsylvania, I think, is sort of my magnum opus because that is where I bring together the insights and knowledge that I'd accumulated from creating Ibomian, which is predominantly based on one of the native languages that I speak rather. And in Pennsylvania, what was especially challenging but also rewarding about the language that I wanted to create, other than aesthetic, was the fact that I wanted to sort of shift Pennsylvania away from certain. I wanted to shift Pennsylvania away from the from where PAX originally imagined it to have been. So PAX had started with Pennsylvania as this abstract hive mind sort of kind of nation, predominantly from a role playing as opposed to world building point of view. And then PAX moved on to create Pennsylvania as a more Middle Eastern kind of nation. So I wanted to keep the Middle Eastern vibe, but I wanted Pennsylvania to be something new because I had felt like given how rare it is for us to see Middle Eastern culture represented within the East Pacific, I didn't necessarily want some of the negative connotations that are associated with a totalitarian state like Pennsylvania had been designed to be associated with um, Middle Eastern culture. So in part, there was semi-ideological reasons for creating Pennsylvanian that weren't just aesthetic, but it was also about trying to break or reimagine certain ideas and stereotypes that people might have when they experience a nation like Pennsylvania or nations that are based on or influenced by cultures in the East, specifically Middle Eastern cultures. Um, and I just want to respond to something quickly. Metapod said I watched Moana like 30 times as research. Yes, but we'll get into all of that and how we actually went through the process of now building the language. So yeah, that's basically my perspective. So aesthetic and ideological reasons. Ian, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So, I'll admit my reasons for creating Aussendavian are just a hell of a lot simpler. I just did it because I could, to be perfectly honest, and just because I wanted to. Aussendavian is my first conlang. It's the only one I've started. It's the only one I've done. It's nowhere near completion at all. I don't care. But I mean, besides just creating it because I could, I guess I kind of also did it to give, I guess, Asindavia a more unique kind of identity because I don't know. I guess prior to having created it, I was just using a lot of different European influences, and like Asindavia is still pretty heavily European influenced, but like previously, like the official name for Asindavien was like the Assatenaglorun Kaiserreich, but I've completely gotten rid of the Kaiserreich part now. Have a different word for emperor now. Have a different word for realm. That whole shebang. So I kind of just wanted also to move it a bit away from German because, like, I mean, sure, German's cool and all, but I want to be a little bit more unique than that, to be perfectly honest. And I've kind of based Aussendavian. Yeah, definitely. Definitely, there's way too much German in TEP. I have to agree. But I kind of also wanted to base Aussendavian the Conlang a bit more on Finnish, and that's especially evident with some of the words in Aussendavian, like the Aussendavian word for sun is Taurinku or Taurinko, which is just one letter away from the Finnish word for sun, which is Aurinko. But I just like the way that Finnish sounds, honestly. So that really that influences heavily how I shape Aussendavian. Not just Finnish actually, but also some Estonian, some Baltic words as well. I'd say kind of mostly Finnish though for my shaping of Aussendavian, to be honest.
Well, I will speak about my language, and then I am noting several comments I want to make both for Owen and for Ian. So get ready. um, yeah, the oh, the reason to create Kukish, that is as old as creating new organisms on Earth. To be honest, because um yeah, I created New Leganes on Earth when I returned to TAP in 2016, in January 2016. Um, and I remember the first thing I ever did when joining Earth was creating Kyrgyz, starting it. I had already I had already the desire to create languages for a long time. I remember myself being a kid and already trying to create languages with a little bit of consistency, and mainly that was phonologically. We'll get into that later. Kyrgyz was also born from that. Um, and the reason to create it probably was to very similarly to Owen and to Ian, to give a more complex background, more lively background to my country. Um, and that like that has grown truly to be the most complex thing of New Leganes in this case. Um, and then like the motivations after that like the main reason, the reason at the beginning was to make something complex about my country, something very defining of it, a very characteristic feature of it. Um, and then it evolved into my own phonesthetic. It didn't evolve. It was right after it. Uh, so it was that is an element both Owen and Ian have had, and yeah, I have also had it. Phonesthetic is really key in Kyrgyz. Um, so for that matter, I started with my own words, like out of nowhere, and then it kept on evolving into a language I love, which is Arabic. It takes um, it takes a notable part of Arabic in phonology, and not even consciously. Most of the times, it's unconsciously. Um, so yeah, look, I've has said something on the chat I've just seen. He says the thing with conlanging is that it's so all-encompassing and complex. A language reflects history, society, and culture in a way pretty much nothing else does. Yes, and that is what moved me from the beginning to create a language for a country. So yeah, those are my reasons. Um, we'll speak later about how Kyrgyz evolved, but the beginning was that. Um, yeah, Owen has impressed me because you have touched every single beginning of a language that I can think of. um, like you have really traveled. You have done that. You have done that journey from creating a language for your own phonesthetic, for doing a language that defines the country, and then doing a language that and even that not only defines that country but takes it a part of other conceptions that were before about that country. That is incredible. And Ian, I am impressed with the well, everyone knows here the incredible fan of Tolkien I am. Uh, so Tolkien said that the two languages that gave him the most phonesthetic experience were Greek and Finnish. And Finnish is um, is like the most influential language on Quenya, which is the High Elvish. So yeah, and Mick says, didn't he also love Welsh? Welsh was the other language, the other Elvish language, Sindarin. Um, but yeah, so like, um, I am happy that we have started from this point because we can link many things from here. Um, really nice. This is this is going to get incredible. Um, yeah. So where to start? That's the third point. Where to start? Well, these are the reasons what motivate us. But at the moment of starting, where did you start from? Phonology, vocabulary, maybe grammar. Grammar, I guess. Well, who knows? Maybe. Uh, what was it?
Well, I guess I'll go first for this one.
Okay.
So, for Davian, I don't even actually have a phonology for Davian yet. Like, I do have an idea of the sounds that Davian uses and doesn't use, but I don't have a written down phonology. All I have for Davian is the vocabulary. I don't have any grammar either. But as for why I haven't written down the phonology yet, that's kind of just laziness on my part, to be perfectly honest. And I find just doing all the vocabulary first to be a bit more fun, I suppose.
So you can say you just started with vocabulary then.
Yeah.
What about you, Owen?
Um, Let me go into my reasons, but I just want to also build on what Ian says first before I go into where I started. I have also noticed that a lot of players actually start from what Ian said, from creating vocabulary. So one of the what I personally find to be one of the most iconic conlangs is Unonian, which was the conlang that was created by Todd McLeod
Mm.
for the country of Vakayu. And Unonian sort of builds on sort of like the basics of using language for aesthetic purposes. So, what Todd did was to create three things that make the the aesthetic, the look and feel of the language. And what they did was A, they created a script, which is the Unonian script. I should actually post a link to the wiki article for that so that everyone can gain an insight. So
I
just by
actually
looking,
already posted the link to
oh,
Unonian in the chat.
Speed.
oh, perfect. So Unonian is a really cool way to look at it's a really sorry y'all there might be some background noises, so please forgive me if I do sometimes stop or whatever the case may be, or if you can hear things in the background. But basically, Unonian, I'm going to start with what Todd did or what I think they did first before I go into where I started. So Todd, three things about Unonian. It's the script, it's the phonesthetics, um, as well as a little bit of the vocabulary. Those those three things, in my opinion, um, especially if you're someone who's starting conlanging for the first time and you don't really know how to approach this, because creating a conlang is an exceptionally difficult and advanced form of role play and world building, and it's something that um, can take quite a lot of time for people to master. So, for instance, as you can see, Ian has already has been going through this process of creating Arts and Deviant for a while, similarly to Sammy, who will also speak about his experience, as well as myself, because I had to go through different iterations of my languages before I arrived at, what is currently my magnum opus, and that is the Pacovanian language. So, where to start is to understand that more important than the specific process or rules that are followed is to understand that in order to create an aesthetic for your language or to use your language for aesthetic purposes as far as your nation is concerned is the script, the phonosthetics, as well as the vocabulary. So I'm just going to go into what the term phonosthetics means because I think we've so Sammy's used that term, but it's just important to understand what the term phonesthetics means. So the term phonesthetics means the study of the aesthetic properties of speech sound, in particular the study of sound sequences. So this kind of term of phonesthetics started predominantly, if not exclusively, with J.R.R. Tolkien, as Sammy has pointed out, is probably regarded as one of the most influential creators of an artistic conlang in modern Western literature and to an extent global literature. And so, where to start as far as creating a language, I think what we learned from Todd is start with those things, even if you're someone, for instance, who isn't very knowledgeable about how languages work, start with those things that start to give a sense of the feel and the look of your language. And that will be how it sounds, what words are used, that being the vocabulary, as well as the whatchamacallit, the script, as in how it's written, because that will help you to use the language for the sake of um the aesthetic of the and the feel and the complexity and so on of the nation. And what you'll notice those three things help you with, and you'll see it in the Kayu a lot, is that even though, for instance, Unonian doesn't necessarily, at least in the TEP Weekly article, maybe Todd has some notes or some additional information that isn't publicly available or that is available in the books. But what you'll notice about Unonian is that even though it isn't necessarily so detailed that you could actually speak it or write it, every time you read place names or people names, or every time a character uses a word within a sentence, what you'll often notice in Todd's writing is that there's a consistency. There's a consistency in the terms that are in the sounds that are created. There's a consistency in how the language is written. There's a consistency in how it's in the kinds of words that are used. So for me, Unonian is a perfect example of how to create a conlang without necessarily creating a fully functional language. Because I do think there's a little bit of a difference. There are fully functional languages that you can create, which is an incredibly difficult and advanced skill. However, at the same time, you can create just the basics of a language, the bare bones of a language, so that you can use it within your RPs to enrich the experience and to make your country easily identifiable from the way that the character speaks, from the way that the names of places and the people are constructed. So that for me, Unonian is the perfect example of where to start to creating a a conlang that you can actually apply within a role playing context. So so that's Todd's what I imagine and learn from Todd's experience of conlanging. Sammy, is it okay if I continue speaking about what I specifically started going into?
Yeah, of
Or would
course.
you like to? Okay, perfect. So let me then talk to y'all about what I did specifically, where I started. And from me, so I was talking about Todd so that y'all could get the vision or the perspective behind how or where to start making conlangs. That being the writing system, the vocabulary, as well as the sounds that are used for the language. And for what purpose? Because of place names, as well as how it's used in dialogue and so on. Now, the process I took, the actual steps, like if you say, okay, Owen, what are the steps that you took? This is what I did. Firstly, I benefit from being able to speak quite a lot of languages. For example, if you must know, I come from South Africa and we have 11 official languages and dozens of others. So in our country, people often speak a variety of languages because it makes it easier to communicate across different, um, to communicate with people who are vastly different. It makes it a lot easier if you know a lot of languages. And I specifically come from a part of our country where a lot of people meet, which is in the city of Johannesburg. So for that reason, I started by taking languages that I was already speaking and then repurposing them. So what you'll start notice if you ever go back to the NS Wiki article page for the own language, you will notice that to an extent, it's based on my native language, which is isiZulu. So that is the language that I speak, the Zulu language of South Africa is my one of my main languages that I speak. So even if you're someone who's not multilingual, I would personally suggest that you take a language you already speak and begin playing around with it. So, for instance, a lot of people I do understand come from countries where you probably only speak English. That would be countries like the United Kingdom, Australia, or the United States. A lot of people they speak English. And it is possible to create a very unique language through adapting English, even if you might not be able, or even if you might not be able to speak another language as I have, you can also take a language that you know, like English, and
Which is
stop playing
partly,
around.
sorry, spoiler alert, what you have done with Pennsylvania.
Yes, exactly. And I'll go exactly into Pennsylvanian. So yeah, so basically, like, take a language you already know and stop playing around with all of the different features, the sounds and the things like that. And I love how Ian said that you looked at Finnish for inspiration as far as vocabulary goes. And that's another element of where to start. Look for a real life culture that you like, for instance, or that you find interesting, even if you're not necessarily well versed in that culture, even if you don't know everything about that culture. Yeah, even if you don't know everything about that culture, but if you find something interesting about it, look at it for inspiration. So, for instance, Sammy, you said that you like the way that Arabic sounds, right?
Yes.
So even if, for instance, you don't know Arabic, like even if you're a player who doesn't know Arabic, but just by listening to how it sounds, look at Arabic and look at some of the tools that are used there that you might be able to understand and co-opt into your own language. And similarly to the process that Ian undertook to some extent, for instance, through the incorporation of Finnish vocabulary, you might find it interesting how Finnish is constructed or how it's able to pack a lot of information into one word. So you can draw inspiration from that through creating words that are very dense with meaning, even if you don't necessarily have the ins and outs of the grammar, the exact phonology, the exact lexical rules, which are something we're going to get into at some point, I hope. Even if you don't have all of those things down, as long as you can take something you already have and something you're interested in, and then bring those together. And that is, for me, a way of starting a conlang. So Kakuna said here, the thing is with English that when you adapt it, it feels kind of weird to the majority because it's too familiar. I agree with that to an extent. It is difficult when you speak English because, especially if it's the only language that you speak. But in my opinion, creating languages is an iterative process. As I said, I created Owen, and then I created Ibomian, and then I created Pacovanian. And similarly, Sammy's been working on Cookish for a long time, taking
S-
things, throwing them
six
out, and
years.
selling them. 6 years. That's an incredible amount of time to be working on a language. And just can I just build on what you said, Sammy? So when I was a kid, right, I actually did create a conlang, which was basically based on taking English and then just reversing the words, the letters and the words. And that language was called Spotanian. It
Spontaneous.
was for, yeah. So it was for a country called Spotania that I had created. Now, obviously that process might not seem highly advanced, and I was a kid then, and but that's the reality. A lot of us are going to enter conlanging without knowing linguistics in any depth, and that's perfectly okay. Like, it's okay to say I'm going to take English and adapt it, in as much as people might be familiar with it, or they might be. If you can take the language that you already know and you can use the ideas and those concepts, you learn a lot. And English is an incredibly complex language. Like, so there's a YouTuber called Bibloridian who actually did a ranking of different languages that they liked. And he said that if the Bantu languages, which is one of the languages that I speak, that I'd mentioned before, have so much consistency, you would think that they're conlangs. But the great thing about English is that English is, even if it's not consistent, it's very rich in highly complicated rules. It is probably one of the most difficult languages in the entire world to learn. It is hard beyond reason. And that's because of how English has adopted all of these elements of different types of languages. So by taking a piece of English and expanding it further, you might be surprised the kinds of structures you can create. Let me use a simple example. Something you'll notice about English pronouns. So, for example, he, her, they, them, all of those pronouns is that they're the only part of and we'll go into more detail when we do grammar. But what you'll notice about English that the pronouns, depending on where you put a pronoun in a sentence, it changes the word. So for example, you might say, I am I am doing this and that. Um, he is doing something to me. So you're referring to the same person or entity, but changing the word. That is a principle um, within grammar that is called inflection. So you can take that principle and then apply it not just to pronouns, but apply it to all kinds of words within your language. So I do believe that there is so much potential in learning, in taking whatever you have, even if it's English. Like, don't look down on the fact that, oh no, I don't, know all of this and know all of that. I don't know a lot of things about this. I don't know a lot of things about that. That's okay. Take what you know and play around with it, and you'll be surprised the kinds of languages that you can create. So that is personally where I would say that people should start. Start with what you have, play around with it, and then look at languages that you find interesting, even if you don't know much about them, and take those bits and pieces you find interesting and then put them together. So that is my suggestion for where people should start. I've said a mouthful. So yeah. Um,
Well, that is really interesting and kind of funny because so the answer for on for question three is actually six, based on your previous languages. Yeah, and I will retake this when we reach that point because I will address a topic I always address, and that is what is originality itself, and is it really a thing or not? Um, or is it good or bad to be original or not? That will be what we'll address by then. Um, so yeah, on my case, where did I start? Well, that was vocabulary again. I believe on this case, probably most people will be there. Then I continued with phonology. Like I believe the best starting point and what most people that do Conlang is start. Uh, that is maybe you create words out of nowhere. If you're going for an originality purpose, then we will see if that is original or not. That is another thing. But if you're going for an originality, um, the starting point would be creating words out of your own mind, and then going with a similar phonology. And, well, that is when I noticed that I was following an Arabic phonology because I didn't intend to make it Arabic sounding, but it happened. Um, and I know it happened because I love Arabic. I love its phonology, and and that's probably my subconscious standard for what is pleasant to my ears and what would be an ideal language like. Um, Continuing with this, I have yeah, Kyrgyz is kind of what the ideal language would be for me. With the years, I have learned that ideals don't exist. They are ideals, but there's no barriers stopping you from reaching them. That Kyrgyz is not the exception. I have made Kyrgyz in order to make it realistic. I have had to give it elements that maybe I didn't like as much, but that gave it consistency. The point Owen was speaking about. Um, Consistency is also really key. You like obsessing with having a language be like this, like that, or like that isn't also good. It kind of evolves with the time. Um, Something on in these regards as how a language evolves with time and also with you. Um, Owen has said something really interesting, and that is that most of us are linguists. That is not my case, as you know, but I wasn't a linguist when I started Kukish, and and a huge part of Kukish was done when I was studying language rather than actually knowing it. Um, so Kukish grew with me. Um, Kukish more than with me grew with my formation on languages. Um, so the sorry the where was I? Sorry, I had interrupted. Yeah, so being a linguist and watching how it has evolved with time also tells a lot of how one how one doesn't do this for an academic thing, but rather for this is art. This like, as you create a story, and as you create a world or a country, as we do, and this is something we do for our personal taste. So we do with languages. Um, so the personal taste and knowing what you want to do, is truly a good starting point. I want to, like Owen said, I want to do a language that is a modification from English. Well, there you go. I want to do a language that is of my own. Well, in that case, I would recommend the vocabulary plus basing on the phonology of that vocabulary afterwards, and then creating a grammar then that articulates those words. Maybe an alphabet too, like EM did. EM, who is listening here, has an incredible alphabet and has an incredible system for agglutinating languages. Uh, and even when he hasn't worked on it for a while, I am sure he is creating awesome material. Um, and so, like, that is to provide a different perspective of what you can do with a language. So, what like what path should it evolve to then? That is what we will get in the next questions. Because, I actually was sure that it would happen like that. That we would answer that our first point would be vocabulary and phonology, because I haven't heard anyone else whose starting point was any other than these. Um, so, creating phonology and vocabulary. We have already spoken a bit about this. But how? What would you say that? Um, oh my God, I'm cutting myself so much. Um, what would you say that you were? How to express it? What would you do to create a phonology that is consistent? That was the word. And a vocabulary that is consistent and isn't just taking words randomly, and but rather giving it consistency.
Mm. Yeah, that's fantastic question. Ian, do you wanna answer that first? or would you like me to go?
I think you can go first, considering I don't even have a phonology for Ossendavian and such officially.
Okay. So, as far as creating a phonology goes, so let's actually work into. There's going to be some terminology today. Because,
We love
wow.
it. Well, I don't know about the rest, but we, because I can say we.
Yes, true. So, let's go into phonology. So, phonology, the definition is a branch of linguistics that studies how languages or dialects systematically organize their sounds. So, key things there: sounds, how they're organized, and how, like, the systematic approach by which they're organized. So, some languages, like English, are a little bit more chaotic than others, but the idea is that you want to use um when you create your language, you the phonology relates to the specifics of the the way that you're organizing your sounds. Now I'm gonna go into other things. So phonology is divided into y'all don't need to necessarily remember these terms, right? But they will help you. I'm simply saying this just to give you a sense of all the kinds of things you need to or you can think about when creating your phonology. So when you create your phonology, you have your phonetics, which is how the sounds basically what parts of the mouth you are using when you create the sounds, right? That's phonetics.
Mhm.
And then your phonemics is where those sounds are placed within a sentence or within a word, right? So I'm going to repeat that. You have your phonetics, which is what parts of your mouth you are using to create the sounds. And then you have your phonemics, which is where are those sounds placed within um, within a word. So if we look at, for instance, a language like Georgian, Georgian is for me, I'm not a fan of of the phonology of a language like Georgian, which we know here to be Salovian. Thank you, Jesse. And the reason is because and again it depends on the kind of aesthetic you want. Some languages, like Georgian, have a lot of consonants next to each other, and others have a lot of vowels next to each other. So it will also depend on the kind, again, the kind of vibe. So we associate certain languages with certain emotions, and some of those stereotypes are not fair, but they are real. So, for example, you have a language like German that sometimes people might feel is very harsh, and very, but from a world building point of view, if you're creating a nation of people who are a bit harsh and "Arr," there are certain sounds that we often associate with harshness, and those are usually um, languages that don't have a lot of vowels. But if you want to create a country where the people are very gentle and lovely, you are going to want to use soft sounds and lots of vowels. That comes to another principle called sonority, but I don't know if I should discuss that or if Sammy, you wanna talk first, and then I'll come back again to continue because the discussion on phonetics is huge. Like there is so much that goes into it. But
Mhm.
just to summarize the points I've raised, you have your phonetics, which is how your mouth makes the sounds, phonemics, how the sounds are placed and where they're distributed, and so on and so forth. Um, yeah, so Sammy, Ian,
Yeah.
y'all can go next, and I'll come back afterwards to cover other points that y'all haven't raised. Cool.
Okay. Yeah. Um. Well, the hold on, hold on for a moment. The languages. Uh, Hold on. I am intending multiple things. Sorry. Um. Okay. Now there we go. Yeah, about cookies and the phonology. Yeah, phonology is like I said, is the main part, the main part of cookies from the beginning, and I believe it still is phonology and phonesthetics. And linking with the last thing Owen said, you know, I can am a person that finds beauty in multiple kinds of languages. I have so Owen was speaking about the harshness of German. Um, EM said in the comments, Russian is harsh. I find Russian to be one of the most pleasant languages to my ears. Uh, and in fact, there's a sound I adopted from Russian to Kurdish, and that is the zh sound. Um, so um, what I did with the Kurdish phonology was it was at the first of an, an unconscious creation that ended having a lot of Arabic, but I also had several elements that I knew that I liked, such as the Russian zh or it's actually a ch as in English, but I did it with a phoneme with the same phoneme as the Turkish one because I liked to have a single sound for a sound that would appear a lot on on Turkish and the cha. So at the end, I ended up having a very a combination of everything because I said I find beauty on Russian, also in German, even when German is not a main inspiration for my language. But I also love the sonority of Greek, as Tolkien did. Um, and so I also wanted to not have um, a very unbalanced language towards consonants and vowels. So at the end, it was consonants and vowels altogether. Like it is a language that has two main features. That is syllables with open endings. That is ta 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 instead of tat 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 like in English. Um, Combined with a whole range of different consonant sounds. So you have consonant variety and predominance of vowels. Um, and that happened consciously at times, but also unconsciously because it's what I posit and it manifested that way. It came into life. Um, so on phonology, um, I would advise what I have already said previously on the start, and that is create a word, create words that sound good to your ears, and then look at makes them um, what makes them sound so good. There you have the point of consistency that we were looking for. Um, if you see the characteristics that make your language be what you want it to be, it doesn't have to be beautiful. Maybe you want to have a language that has many palatal sounds. What is palatal sounds? Many ch, sh, for example. Or maybe a language that has a lot of vowels, or a language that has a, a limited range of consonants. Well, whatever. But that is already a consistency point. Um, that makes you uh, that marks you by not having like not doing things randomly with your language. Um, and if you follow that path, you can also add elements or take elements of, um, and the language will grow itself with you and with time. Um, that's why I I had put this fourth point, phonology and vocabulary together, because I believe that they go tied with each other, as we have seen with the other language, with my languages, with Owen, also with Ian. Ian said that he doesn't have a phonology. Well, precisely. One thing that gets my attention from your language too, is that you already have established that you're basing it from Finnish. Well, that is a consistency point already for your phonology, because you're going to follow similar patterns from Finnish. Um, so, as you can see, we're making a map of different concepts that are intertwined, all of them, making a, making a complex map that will end up being a language. But um, speaking about consistency, what gives consistency to a language is how it articulates itself by a system and several mechanisms. That is what we call grammar. That and grammar is a topic that most people like to avoid because it's complex, it's abstract, and it's scary. Um, is it though? That is my question. How should should we focus a lot on grammar and create complex grammar systems, or will it appear only when you want to articulate your language and it will appear naturally?
Ooh, that's a powerful question. Wow. Oh, that's a powerful question. Ian, do you have anything to add on the phonology before we move to grammar, which Sammy has beautifully led us into.
To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure what else I could really add, considering both of you just really kind of covered it beautifully and in a much better way than I would be able to
Oh my god, thank
talk
you.
about the subject, because I don't know, I don't really, I'm not necessarily trained in this subject, you could say so, and sometimes I have somewhat of trouble articulating my thoughts sometimes, so I don't think I
Um,
really have anything else to add on this.
yeah,
What were you going to
on
say, Sam?
yeah, on this, I must confess that I wanted to pick uh different profiles for this. Uh, Profile that has already created very complex languages as Owen, and someone who hasn't created a very complex language, but does have an idea of what they want the language to be like, and that is Ian. Um, so we have like the words you said at the beginning are very revealing, because um, it gives our it's very important to see the intentions and what you and the path you want to take your language into. Um, so even if you haven't created these, it is a incredibly valid opinion and an incredibly interesting opinion. All the things that you said in the beginning, because it will end up being something. Um, and you can see the roots of that. So that's like most people don't have a very complex language. That is truly something Owen and me have been rare in and very successful, to be honest. um, because it's really difficult. But what I want to state here is that um, that language can grow at any time, and I want to encourage the people that is watching us, well, hearing us, to see how it is a whole process and how it will eventually evolve. If it can be really fast, you can create, I don't know, maybe um, you're a genius and you can create a language in, I don't know, less than a year, or it will take some years, but um, it's um, it's an incredible process to go on, and a very rewarding one. With this comment done, um, yeah. What about the grammar? Um, what about? I believe this is the last step of a language, generally. Um, both because it's complex and people think it's more complex um,
It
than it
is,
actually
yeah.
is. What do you think, Owen?
Right, grammar. Actually, I'm hoping that if we have extra time towards the end of the session, I would really like us to come back to vocabulary and phonology. And
Hmm.
I really would like future sessions, if we do more of these, to really go into those in detail because there's just
Oh
so
wow.
much to unpack.
Yes.
Yeah, there's just so much to unpack when it comes to sound and vocabulary. And just to before I get into the grammar, Sammy did really raise a powerful point. Like the way it sounds to you, the way your language sounds to you, and those things you consider beautiful. So for example, I'm not going to go into examples because that's not the point of this segment of the discussion, but yeah, very important phonetics. So grammar, oh Lord have mercy. For me, I feel like grammar is the second last, actually. And I'm gonna
Mm.
tell you what I think is the last step. But grammar is hard. Yeah, grammar is hard as hell. Grammar is difficult. Okay, it is, yeah, like if you don't do the grammar for your language, it is honestly fine. It is honestly perfectly fine because grammar is very difficult. But don't be daunted. It is fun to do. Once you actually get down that road, it is a lot of fun. But it is difficult. And because one of the things you often experience is that you'll often not have a lot of reason to use your language in like big, um, like write a whole speech in um you won't always need to write like a whole speech in your language. So sometimes grammar can feel daunting and it can also seem meaningless. And if that's how you feel, then it's perfectly okay to think that grammar is not that important. But yes, grammar is difficult. So okay. So grammar is in basic language, grammar is simply how your words come together to create meaning. Now that you've got sounds, now that you've got words, it's how do those words come together to create meaning? How do those words change as well to create meaning? So in the old school version of linguistics, Samuel will correct me obviously because this part I'm not
It's alright.
I didn't study linguistics, but I learned a lot about it casually. But in the way that languages work, they usually divide it, the grammar, they usually divide it according to the grammar. And usually they're structured according to what are called synthetic languages, and then there's
Mm.
analytical languages.
Yes,
So
that's true.
synthetic languages usually have two types, and those are your fusional as well as your agglutinative languages. Now, let me explain all of these different terms and what they mean, because they are important. Analytical languages are basically languages where you just have standalone words and you just change the order, and then based on the order of the words, you most of the time people will sort of figure out what is happening. And English works like that a lot. Um, a lot of what happens in English is you just take a word, and then depending on where you put it in the sentence, the person can guess whether or not it's a verb. So, for example, most of the time when we speak English, we usually go subject, verb, object. So it'll be the dog ate the cat, or whatever the situation. So often you'll find the verb is between your two, the thing that is doing the action as well as the thing upon which the action is being done. But obviously grammar, so that's one part of grammar, and that is word order, how you arrange the words. And that is something that is a key feature of languages that are analytical. So if you're someone who wants to create a language where the order matters, then it's helpful to learn about what is analytical um, grammatical morphology. So morphology is how words change. And then you have your synthetic languages, and then which is your agglutinators and your synthetics. And the way that that works is that you can stick things onto, you can take a basic word and then just stick things on it. And then based on what you stick on it, that will determine what the word means. So in Pennsylvanian, that happens a lot. And because Pennsylvanian uses an agglutinative. So often what I basically do is just stick a whole bunch of things onto a root word and it creates the meaning. So you can take, depending on what you want that word to do. So if you want that word to be a verb, you just stick a particular thing on the end and it becomes a verb. And that can tell you even what kind of verb it is. So that's how Pennsylvanian works. You just stick things onto words. And um, there, there's pros and cons to all these different things, but we'll talk about that. Then there's fusional languages, which are the types of languages I most often struggle with. And fusional languages are where you basically change something inside of the word to change the meaning. So, for example, a word in English that is a good example of this is the word know. I know how to draw a man. I know how to draw a man. So um, that's in the present, or rather
Mhm.
non-past tense. And you what in fusional languages you change the inside of the word. So you'll say, I knew how to draw a man, and that completely changes whatever it is you were talking about. It tells you when that action is being done and so on. So these ways of constructing languages, either you change what's inside of the word, you change the order of the word, or you stick things at the beginning and the end of the word, you can use that to construct your grammar. That's a very high level overview of the different types of ways of approaching grammar. And the important thing to know is that you don't have to take one or the other, right? You can take a combination, as English does, for example. You can take a combination where sometimes the order matters, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you can move words to a certain point, sometimes you can move them to a different point. So those are the very basic ideas of um, like morphology, which is how you're changing words and how you're arranging them in order to achieve the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Sammy,
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to expand on the points that I've said, or if maybe you might like to cover
Oh,
things. Oh wait.
yes, I actually want because I have
I was
struggled
gonna.
to define what Kukish is in those regards.
Oh,
Because
okay.
when I was creating the I'm going to check the typical page because I don't remember what I went after at the end. Um, yeah, when I was creating the Kukish tab wiki, um, I struggled because so I decided to brand Kukish as a flexible language because it mainly follows the grammatical structure. of Greek and Indo-European, and Akkadian too. It has elements of Akkadian, such as having a stative instead of a verb to be. Stative is you have instead of like the verb to be, like I am I am Sammy. Well, uh, you can make the you can make the word Sammy have um like have how do you like and a suffix. Oh my god, sorry for. Oh my god, I've slept. I've not slept too much today. I am struggling to find complex elements in my head. But yeah, the stative is when you have a suffix to define if a thing is currently happening. So, for example, for I am Sami, you can add in the case of cookies, you don't add anything. It's the basic case. You have and that is an element that links with Akkadian and Arabic. Both are Semitic. In this case, it was taken from Akkadian, but it also happens in Arabic. For example, in Arabic, I would say Ana ismi Samuel, um, and that is literally Ana is I, ism is name, e is the suffix, is a possessive suffix. So I, name of me, Semi, but you don't say is. Um, that is that is a stative sentence. So those kind of like mixing different aspects. Uh, than having mainly Indo-European grammar for the verbs, especially except for this stative stative mode. The that was it was a difficult time to brand cookies as a because I didn't think about it. I didn't think I want to make a functional language. I want to make a flexible language. I want to make an agglutinative language. I just went on with what I thought that was nice, and then we get into another key element of my language, which is uh, there's no there's not only phonesthetic but also aesthetic on grammar. Um, I took the elements that I liked the most from the languages I know the grammar of and implemented them and combined them in ways that would be um, that would make sense, that would be consistent, as we were saying before. Um, so, for example, there's a thing that I liked a lot. So I like a lot from Arabic again the personal suffixes. Well, I took the personal suffixes in the three singular presents in the three singular like the grammar from Arabic directly, and then instead of having the Arabic plurals, I I did a suffix with R, which defines the plural for for cookish. So just having the same suffix as in singular, but with an R before the suffix. So this way, you have, for example, the word is the which word can we take? Yeah, this um, the word is erfi, which means wing. So this word ends in I. There we have a problem because there's suffixes that end in vowel. What do we do then? You have several options. You have the option to add it directly and create erfi with two eyes at the end. Mm, make an infix. An infix is a union element between between the root or another suffix and the final suffix, and make it as I did, edify, with that e being the infix. Or you can also contract. Greek does a lot of contracting, and it is nice, but you have to create several rules. So I didn't like it, and because it would take a lot of time from me to begin with, and second, because I wanted to make Kukish a language that is um, that is complex made yet simple in form, if you understand. A language that is easy to get. I have seen an example later of those kind of languages with Hittite. Hittite is a language that has very few exceptions. It's just the grammar features, and then the and then one or two exceptions. Well, I didn't know Hittite before, but when I did Kukish, but Kukish is a very similar language. So um, complexity is a very fair target to pursue, but simplicity is also another fair one. So do not be afraid of leaning more towards one or the other side, because it will be realistic anyway. You have languages as Greek or English, as Owen was saying before, that have a whole lot of exceptions and a whole lot of rules. And then you have languages as Hittite, which is literally ABC, and that's it. Um, so yeah, th- this was about grammar, and now um, I want to state that grammar isn't as complex as it might seem. It just uses a lot of terminology. Um, because we're trying to explain phenomena that are that a whole variety of phenomena. Um, and we need specific terms for what happens there. We can't just say, "Oh, the S goes here, and it transforms into something." Um, so that's why we use complex terminology, but don't be afraid of it. Um, Probably, if you go your own way without knowing the terminology, you might end up creating actual, real linguistic phenomena without even noticing, because that has happened, and that has happened with me, and I'm sure it has happened with everyone that has created a Conlang without having a lot of linguistic knowledge or having an academic intention.
Can I
Um,
build on that?
oh, what did you say?
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. So if you want to keep speaking, please do.
No,
But I
no,
do want to
that was
just.
it. That was it. You got it perfectly.
So you raised such an interesting point about how two things that I drew from what you said, Sammy. How you said um, grammar also influences the aesthetic or the vibe of your language. And you can make certain grammatical choices based on the vibe you want for your language. Number one. Number two, you said sometimes you don't like it's important we use these terms within when we talk about grammar. We use all these terms when we talk about grammar, but sometimes you don't necessarily need all of those terms. How for example, you were saying you can just start doing things and then eventually they become like it becomes grammar, if that makes sense. You start changing certain things or arranging things in a certain way and eventually it becomes grammar. And what a lot of what like okay, so what linguistics love doing is to take languages and especially define their grammar according to all these terms and all these rules. But what you realize about a lot of languages is that when those people were making them up, when they were speaking them, they weren't doing it according to the rules of linguistics, especially English, because there are no rules there, or there's too many rules. But people literally just started speaking and it became language. And eventually, with time, we started defining what are these people doing. So,
Yes, the grammar terms
mm,
are standards, are
mm,
are terms that we have given afterwards. The actual phenomena have happened.
yes, yes, you see exactly that. So, like Sammy said, don't be scared of grammar because and don't be like too worried about using all of the correct terms and being absolutely perfect. Focus on how you want your words to come together. And then I'm going to speak quickly about the aesthetics of grammar because we've spoken about how the sounds that you produce um, and the words that you choose can give a vibe for the kind of language you're creating. However, grammar also does, and this is one of the ways that it does. If you'll notice something about so Sammy, you said that you want cookish to be fairly to be complex but simple. Well, I wanted Pennsylvanian to be very complex, but not as complex as like some oral languages like Navajo or whatever the case may be. Like not that complex, but I wanted Pennsylvanian to be difficult. I didn't want it like or at least not initially easy to people who speak English. I did, and the reason for that is I wanted Pennsylvania to be a very rich, old kind of country, a very stuffy almost kind of country um in terms of like the way that the people there are, because it's such an ancient nation from an RL point of view, because Pennsylvania is like over 20 something, is it 20 years old? I think it's either nearly 20s, but it's around 20 years old. It's a very, very old country. Um, so because it's such an ancient nation, I wanted its history to also be ancient. So I wanted it to have a lot of not random rules, but to just be a very formal, almost kind of language where there's just so much going on and so much you need to learn, sort of as part of reflecting this history as a very ancient, mystical, maybe not mystical, but mysterious nation. And part of that was creating a grammar that was very complex and that included lots of different kinds of rules, and there's all sorts of different ways that you can create words. So you can actually use grammar to influence the aesthetic or the vibe of um, your language. So two things to note there from what Sammy said. You don't have to know all the terms first. You can't just start putting things together, and be um, how you put things together also reflects the kind of vibe or aesthetic you want to create for your nation. Right,
Mhm.
Sammy, you can continue with the.
Yeah. Well, we're getting into the most spicy question, uh, in my opinion, of this Earthcast, and that is, mm, like, is it? We have already spoken a bit about it, but is it? Is it? What is it? What is better? To have an original language, or to base it on a previous one so you have already a basis and you can work on it better? Well, on this, we have already said something, but I would like to say that this is a very personal stance I have, that originality is doesn't exist as we usually take it, as we usually think about it. Originality, in my opinion, is originality in the ways you take previous material and rebrand it. And not necessarily in a conscious way. It can happen in an unconscious way, as it happened with Arabic and Turkish in my case. Or um, so, is it possible to have an, a completely original material, or is it is it good or bad to have it, or 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 what are the advantages or on basing on previous languages? Um, in this case, well, Ian, you have based on Finnish. Um, so what was the advantage you found in basing on another language, in this case, Finnish?
Well, basing it at least somewhat on another language meant that I didn't quite have to think up as many unique words by myself, so to say. Like, the vast majority of the words that I've taken from, like, Finnish or Estonian or Lithuanian, Latvian, etc., the vast majority of them I haven't directly ripped. I have changed them at the very least. Whether it be, I don't know, a few letters, just the way it sounds. Sometimes I even just take a word from Finnish and just completely rearrange the letters, essentially, and it then just doesn't resemble the original Finnish word. But, I have to say that, if you do take from another language, obviously, just unless you are making a language that is supposed to be, yeah, unless you're making a conlang that's like supposed to be like related to another language, like I don't know, say you were making a conlang that's a related language to Finnish, then you could maybe just take some Finnish words directly, and I don't know, maybe keep them in that conlang. But honestly, just change up the words some at least. That's my take. Like the Finnish word for ford, like the ford at a river where you would like cross a river. The Finnish word for that, if I remember correctly, is kalamo, and the Ossendavian word for ford is kulamo. So I've essentially taken the Finnish word, but I've at least changed it somewhat, and I think that's fine. But if I had just directly taken the word kalamo and just stuck it into Ossendavian, I wouldn't have been happy with that. I'm a bit kind of getting almost rambly here, but I hope I'm at least making some sense with what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, completely, absolutely. Uh, what about you, Owen?
Originality, right. Hey, oh. I fully agree with both of what you two have said as far as originality, because it's very, very difficult. Most of us are creating human languages, basically, in the sense that a human can speak that language. So it's very rare that we will create something that not a single other language on earth has done before. And there are like 7,000 or more languages on this planet, obviously, depending on how you define a language and so on. But the point is, there are so many that it's a lot of work to expect yourself to create something that's perfectly new. Now, when you, one of the cool things is that when you, sometimes you can make things look original because people in the context are unfamiliar with them. So, for instance, um, when I use isiZulu as inspiration behind pretty much all of my conlangs, but specifically Pacovanian, because most, I don't know if anyone else does, but I think the most of the people here don't know isiZulu at all. So
I probably have the only I have heard is actually from you. So
you see, so for that reason, Pacovanian might seem, at least from a grammatical point of view, because the sounds are not Zulu at all. But from a grammatical point of view, people might find it interesting. Wow, oh, there's all of these weird, complex constructions. But I mean, they're basically repurposed from an existing conlang. So not an existing conlang, an existing RL language. So sometimes, like Sammy, you said, I strongly do believe that you can take existing material, and what makes it original is how you put it together. Because, for example, if I have to speak specifically about my experience, in as much as I might have taken Zulu grammatical principles, I took an Arabic sound because the people in packs are cats basically, and cats make certain sounds like and and
Mhm.
cats make certain sounds. So you'll notice that the H in there's lots of H's and there's lots of h and 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 there's a lot of sounds at the back of the throat in Pennsylvanian.
Pennsylvanian
And
is hereby declared cat language.
exactly. So with Pennsylvanian, because I drew so much on the fact that they're cats, the sounds are sounds that I would associate with cats, and hence why you have a lot of sound that come from the back of the throat. So, like you said, Sam, originality is um not so much as relevant as um how the language fits, which I love what you said, Ian, when you said that sometimes how the language fits into a broader context actually is an important determinant of how different or similar you make it to other languages. So, something about Pennsylvanian is that it's based, it's in part, I wanted Pennsylvanian to belong to a larger group, right? I wanted it to have some relationship with the languages of um Aurora and the Peregrina Island group. So like Peregrina, the own Isles, etc. and so on. I wanted there to be some relationship, even if it wasn't and I wanted Pennsylvania to have a relationship um with Unonian and all of those languages. So something you'll notice is that you might not have noticed it because I tried so hard to hide it, but I'm not obviously the best at everything, so it might not necessarily show. But anyway, what I did with Pennsylvanian is that sometimes I will use words from surrounding nations' languages, or the I will use like the predecessor word of something. So let me make an example. In Pennsylvanian, um, an island is the root word for an island is silamiat, right?
Mhm.
Silamiat. And reason being um is that it's partly based on like the way that the word island is spelled, which is ISL land, whatever.
Mhm.
And if you go back, one of the related words to the word island is like isla. A lot of European languages have that word isla
Yeah,
or
Isla
isle.
Isla is actually the Spanish word.
Mm.
But the you kn- this is well, you have touched Latin. Get ready. So yeah, it comes from insula. Insula is
There we go. Mm.
it's and then it has evolved in isola in Italian,
Mm.
isla in Spanish, and island in English. And I believe something similar in French, but I don't remember exactly now.
Eel in French.
Ill, yeah. Hmm.
So what Pacovanian does is because I wanted it to have some relationship with Stanish and um all these other surrounding languages, I was like, okay, let me take the root letters. That's S and L. And then let me play around with that. But given that I want to give it a more Middle Eastern vibe, I added that yat at the end because some words that we associated with that we associate like there's some like that YAT sound, sometimes we hear it a little bit in Arabic for place names and so on, or not in Arabic, but in Middle Eastern languages. So, for example, in Turkish, there's an administrative thing called it's called a vilayet, which is just a place, some administrative division in the Ottoman Empire. So I combined this word from English and related languages, and then I took something um, from Turkish, and I put those together to create the kind of um, to create this word, which is Silamiyat. So it's very difficult to be original, but it's sometimes often far more useful, like Ian said, to look at how your language fits into the broader world. If you want your language to be completely unrelated to everything else, you might end up, for example, um, going with the approach, like Sammy said, of just thinking up a bunch of random arrangement of sounds to create words and making your language an entirely isolated language, which is also fine, as there are many isolated languages like Japanese, Korean, and Greek that just don't, and Hungarian that don't have close relationships with other languages that are close by or around them. But at the same time, if you want your language to be part of a bigger universe, it's perfectly okay to draw from um, other languages that are spoken near your country, especially if there's a lot of history between your country. So with Dylan, before I took over PAX, Dylan started to strengthen the relationship between Mostibishlia and Pennsylvania. So when I took over PAX, I built on that. I was like, let's continue this relationship. And one of the ways that I was able to represent that relationship was through the choice of words, sounds, and the arrangement of those sounds within Pennsylvania. So I personally think that it's far more important to look at how your language fits, if at all it does, as well as um, what you find attractive,
Hmm.
and using that to create your language, as opposed to trying like originality for its own sake. I don't think is worthwhile. So that's my perspective.
Yeah. I must say, in my case, when creating vocabulary, I still go through the process of um, thinking about a random word in my head.
Which is
Um,
totally valid. Totally valid. Mm.
but it's interesting because since I already have the vocabulary of Kikuchi in my head, and I have already um, assumed it and rooted it inside me. The When I want
Mm.
to think about a Kikuchi word, um, it always happens to be with a Kikuchi phonology. Um, and and if sometimes it doesn't, even in a smaller way, I I just modify it afterwards, and there you have it. So even in that sense, if we were speaking before that Turkish, um, Turkish's phonology draws from Arabic mainly, but also from other languages, Greek or even Russian. Um, Even if you see it with that perspective, you're not exactly being original. It has an element of real life. Um, so the point that I want to reach here is what I said at the beginning. Try to uh, don't try to achieve originality by originality, or and yes, exactly. Basing on current languages is completely valid, and it's probably what everyone has done. But before we get into the conclusions, I want to note one thing that Owen is doing, and that I didn't know that he was doing, and I am surprised by it. And it is something that I am also doing, literally from the last Sunday the 13th, actually. So it was a very interesting situation. I was returning from a work trip to Granada, and Granada is it's another Spanish city, and it's far away from here. It was 4 hours by bus. So the bus didn't have any charge, any plugs to charge the phone. So I was left there with a bunch of papers and no connection and no phone. So what I did was um, start creating roots for my words, because I believe that's another element of consistency, and that is a complex step to take, and probably one of the last steps to take. But some some conlanger we have already spoken about, and that is Tolkien. He believed that roots were the first step, and he actually the process he did was first creating the root, and then creating the words that derive from that root, and they could have multiple meanings, and even not anymore related with the original root. I believe that is risky. That requires a previous linguistic knowledge or a previous contact with conlanging. Um, but it shows how there can be different consistency elements, um, very complex ones, and that a language. So I started Kukish 6 years ago, and until literal days ago, I didn't start with this root thingy. And Owen has already been a time with Pakilvanian, and he's now doing the roots too. Um, so so yes, a language keeps on evolving with you, and you it's something you have to take account of. That probably it will take some time, because uh, a language is complex, but more most of it has you bring something into life. It's like it's like creating a whole being, because you're with that language you're going to represent um, a whole people that speak it, the and with all the different characteristics, the countries they're spoken in, the regions, the features you want to give those regions or countries that you are creating. Um, and for that, you will get into different points when you need to create something new for your language. So we can say that Pakilvanian or Kukish are fully developed languages, but in the sense of they have put themselves in the path of evolving naturally as a language does, and reaching the process of having to study complex processes um, to keep on giving them the final shape that they probably will never, truly never reach. Um, but that isn't bad, in my opinion. That is good. Um, like you can keep on creating other languages, but you can always return to those other languages and think something new for them. Keep on creating them. They will always be alive, and they will always be there for you to improvise with them, to try new things, to I don't know, create new vocabulary you hadn't created before, the words we were talking about, developing new grammar phenomena. Um, that is never ending. Um, this podcast could also be never ending, truly. But we now have reached the end. But before it effectively happens, I would like to. This have been my conclusions, and I would like to hear Owen or Ian's opinion, Ian's conclusions too. Um, since we don't, since our audience hasn't been as big as it was in the beginning because this has been a really long podcast. Um, I encourage anyone that is listening this afterwards to ask us any question that they might have of it. So anything to add at the end, Owen, Ian?
Sure, I can speak and then Ian, you can close us off. So yeah, man, the process of just closing words for me. The process of creating a conlang is an incredibly enriching experience. It's a lot of fun, um, and it's a lot of fun learning about something different. And but however, it doesn't have to be fun for you as well, and that's okay. You know, some people might not find it as relevant to create a language from scratch, which is perfectly fine. Um, So, in as much like we say, yes, I want to use Conlang to enrich my country and so on, your country can be enriched by a variety of other things that that don't even have to be about Conlanging. For example, if you look at Great Moster Bishlia,
Wow.
what Dylan has done, with Great Moster Bishlia is incredible. Incredible. Like, Great Moster Bishlia is so rich, yet they speak English basically, and British English at that. So you can create incredibly beautiful stories and complex nations without conlangs. But conlangs are incredibly enriching and wonderful as well. So, A, don't put too much pressure on yourself, have lots of fun, and I'm sincerely hoping that we can do more of these sessions and really get into the nitty-gritty so that we can cover certain specifics that people might um, have questions about or might like to know more about. But yeah, enjoy conlanging or not conlanging, whatever suits your boat. That's from me, Ian.
Well, I mean, I'm not really sure if I have anything else to add after both of you have spoken about this, but I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'll reiterate the point about conlanging. Again, like Owen said, you don't have to for your nation to be, enriched or whatever. It's totally optional. You can do tons of other things to enrich your nation. Religion, just create a culture, but not necessarily a conlang. Just I don't know, tons of stuff. Hell, even come up with unique cuisines and shit. I don't know, whatever suits your fancy. But conlanging.
Mhm.
God, where was I even going with this? Wow, I've lost my train of thought. Wow. I think we've been streaming too long now. It's been like an hour 45. I've completely lost track of time.
Almost exactly 1 hour 48.
Oh damn.
Yeah.
Wow.
We will close this then. Uh, but before that, Conlangen is an art, and do it if you want, do it if you like it, and if you like it, you will enjoy it as the best thing. Um, So yeah, this has been the fourth edition of Urthcast and probably the longest one, but it has been incredible. And I hope that feeling is shared, and that this podcast, this Earthcast, is useful for future generations of role players and of world builders of TEP. That is now near 20 years old. Um, And for the long story that for long history that is still left of tab, I hope that this is a valid resource for all the people that are yet to come. So this has been all. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in Urthcast 5.
Yay! Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.